The Greek economy is still in bad shape. In fact, it's no better than it was in June 2015 when the European Central Bank closed the banks. Joining me today in the studio is Fabio De Masi, German MEP, and also the former Greek Finance Minister, Yanis Varoufakis. Thank you for joining us today. This new campaign you have focused on the ECB, tell us about it.
Well, Yanis and I found out that the European Central Bank was not sure whether what it has done with Greece, with other countries in the past, was legal. That they shut down the banks if the Greek government would not accept new loans on top of the old debts and to continue cutting pensions, wages, public investment. Indeed, Mr. Draghi was not sure whether this was legal and commissioned a study by a private law firm. And when I asked Mr. Draghi to release that study as an elected member of the European Parliament, he refused to do so.
The European Central Bank said that part of the rationale for this was that it wasn't in the public interest to release these documents. As an elected member of the European Parliament, do you find that you work against the public interest, or should you be in receipt of this information in the public interest?
Oh, I hope I work in favor of the public interest, and indeed I think it would be wise for Mr. Draghi to do so as well. A monetary policy that hides from the public is never a transparent and good monetary policy.
Yanis Varoufakis, part of the issue that you have with this is not just what the central bank did, but that the Eurogroup itself was the one that pulled the plug, and that interferes with the independence of the European Central Bank. Tell us about that.
Well, we have created a monetary union that has put Mario Draghi and the European Central Bank in a very difficult position. They're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. They are supposed to be, according to their charter, the most independent central bank in the West. And yet, at the very same time, because the Eurozone is not constructed in order to deal with insolvencies of either banking sectors or indeed states, they are forced at some point to make decisions that go against their own charter. And therefore, they are themselves on very brittle ground and they know it. Now, this is not the fault of Mario Draghi, of the good people in the European Central Bank. It's our fault as European citizens and politicians for not having constructed the ECB and the Eurozone in a way that would allow them to do their job properly and without violating their own rules.
But they actually made the rules up as they went along in this case as well, did they not? Did that they created a waiver where they should have shut down the banks when the banks became insolvent in the first instance, and then that waiver was removed again and the emergency lending was offered instead, which is more expensive instead of the regular liquidity. So this was made up as it went along. This wasn't based on the rules.
No, because the rules were not designed to sustain the shockwaves of the great financial collapse of 2008. Let's be honest now. We created an edifice that could not sustain the shockwaves of that huge earthquake. The problem, however, is this. We have exorbitant power vested in the ECB and at the same time powerlessness by the ECB to make its own decisions without the consent of the Eurogroup, which doesn't exist even in European Union treaties. So we've created a mess. Now that mess was shown up by the events in Greece in 2015. But it is a mess that we have to deal with today. We have Italy. We have a Eurozone generally, which is at an advanced stage of disintegration. There are calls in Germany for rethinking the operations of quantitative easing of the European Central Bank. Our campaign has a very simple point. Clearly, we need to rethink the architecture of the Eurozone and the functioning of the European Central Bank.
Here in the European Parliament, your colleagues have some discussions with Mario Draghi but no real control over what he does. Do you think that's going to change?
Yes, because I think that as long as there is no transparency, there is a great incentive for the Jeroen Dijsselbloems, the Schäubles and so on, to dictate to Mr. Draghi what he should be doing with Greece, with Italy. And I think that this policy will lead to the implosion of the euro itself. So either Mr. Draghi becomes more accountable or the euro will be history.
You're writing at the moment about the future of Europe and what you think should be done next. Generally, first of all, where do you think Europe's going?
Oh, the way we're moving is certainly along the path of disintegration. Even the latest Juncker suggestions are pointing to this, that Europe is failing to run ahead of the curve. We're still constantly outpaced by the crisis. And now all this talk about variable geometry is simply an acknowledgement that the crisis is causing the disintegration of the European Union.
Variable geometry isn't going to solve the Greek debt problem. That endless pit of debt is not going to grow, and the evidence this week was already there that there is no growth and the prospect of it is minimal, if anything, over the next few years. How do you see that being resolved?
The Greek crisis is just a canary in the mine. It's simply indicative of the fact that the European Union has failed to have the conversation amongst itself on what it wants to do with the European Union and the monetary union and the single market. Every time I listen to conversations, especially behind closed doors, it sounds as if, very much as if there is almost a holy war and lack of communication, a political coordination failure to deal with what should be, technically speaking, a rather simple way of resolving it. The Greek public debt is going to be restructured when the Eurozone is restructured, when we have a rational way of managing the macroeconomy of the European Monetary Union, which at the moment nobody's actually minding. No one is managing.
Fabio De Masi, the centre-right within the European Parliament, how do they view this crisis? How do they view the transparency of the European Central Bank? And how do they view the restructuring of Greek debt?
Well, Mr. Schäuble, for example, is simply interested not to tell the electorate in Germany the truth ahead of the elections, that he sank money into a black hole. It's exactly as Yanis described. We basically told the Greeks to sell every asset they have, to not go to work anymore to earn an income, but take a new credit card on top. It's clear that this cannot work. And I think especially the center-right is afraid to tell the people what they've really done. They have not saved the Greek pensioner, they've saved German and French banks. And they should have exposed from the beginning what they were doing. And then we could have had a rational public debate whether we should save the German and French banks or whether we should really restructure that, which is clearly necessary.
Yanis Varoufakis, some suggest that part of the problem was the personal friction between you and Wolfgang Schäuble. Do you, first of all...
Nothing could be further from the truth. I can assure you I had a very good relationship with Wolfgang. I have the greatest respect for him. I think that towards the end that respect was reciprocated. And in the end we agreed on many things. We agreed that the MOU and the new bailout was not the solution. We agreed that the Eurozone was not sustainable. It was a political failure, an architectural failure, which you can still now observe. I've been removed. Tomorrow, maybe Dr. Schäuble will not be there. The problem will remain. And it will remain because it is deep in the foundations of the way we're doing business in Europe.
Finally then, the Treaty of Rome, its big birthday is coming up in March, and the opportunity to reform the Eurozone, all those things are now on the table. What's your prediction for the European Central Bank and the Eurozone in general? How will this restructuring occur?
Well, on the 25th of March, DiEM25, our movement, the Democracy in Europe movement, will be in Rome. We have a major presentation of our answer to your question. We call it the European New Deal. We are proposing 4 or 5 very concrete, practical policies of how to stabilize the Eurozone and Europe more generally, including countries that are not members of the European Union, by means of policies that deal with public debt, private debt and the banking system, the underinvestment crisis and the social economy. We believe that we need to simulate very quickly simulate what a federal Europe would be like without moving towards a federal Europe, using existing institutions, redeploying them within the present rules and to produce stabilization. And then once we have stabilization, we can have the discussion that we haven't had for such a long time on what the European Union should look like.
Yanis Varoufakis, Fabio De Masi, thank you. I'm Brian Maguire.